Joining us now from the Stereo MCs is the legendary Rob B here on KNON and KNON Now. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going fine. How are you doing?
When was the last time you guys were in America?
It was actually January.
Okay,
Yeah, we played in we played in New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Boston.
excellent.
Yeah, yeah.
And how do you find America these days? Is it still very receptive? Is it always good to come back, especially probably to places like Philly and New York?
Yeah, the crowds were very nice, especially in New Jersey. It was really warm.
Oh, that's great.
Um, yeah, I think you see, it was a long time since we've been over to America, probably over 20 years. Um, and things do change inevitably.
Mm-hmm.
So all I got to do is look at neighborhoods where I've lived, and I see how things change. That's
Right.
life. Things change.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Excellent. So tell me a little bit about this tour. Promoting some new music. We'll get into some of your recent singles. So tell me where this tour is coming from and what you're trying to do this time around.
I think we just want to reintroduce ourselves to the audience over here, um, and be able to share our history, which spans quite a lot of years now and a lot of different releases. And we're basically going to be playing songs from all our records, including some collaborations that we've made with other people in more recent times. Um, and just, like share that energy, really, that we love to share when we play live. It's
Absolutely.
a special feeling. Uh, and I think that's really why we want to come over, because these are pretty weird times we're living in. And I think if we can travel as far as we can, and reach as many people as we can, I think that's what we feel our mission is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that reintroducing yourself because you guys do have such a long history. I'm personally a fan from back in the Elevate My Mind, Lost in Music days.
Yeah.
Especially Elevate My Mind was huge here in Dallas. I used to DJ at this club, and I probably played that every week for at least a year. Huge hit here in Dallas.
Well, well, thanks to people like you that it got us out there to do a whole bunch of really, quite strange gigs. Because that tune kind of blew up on the West Coast,
Uh-huh.
uh, and it was very good for us as well. It was
Yeah.
that it really enabled us to make a third album, which was connected,
Hmm.
because that was off our second record, Supernatural. And I think Island Records really needed to see a glimmer of success in order to continue. It's all very well having a bit of critical, acclaim or whatever, but you need to, at the end of the day, have a bit of commercial success in order to get a third album under your belt.
Right.
So that was vital to us, really.
Kind of paved the way for you. Yeah, I don't think I realized at the time it actually was a hit on the Billboard charts here in the US.
Yeah,
In
I think we
the
did all right. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so
yeah.
that was really cool. So definitely paved the way for your future success. About the tour right now, tell me a little bit about the band. Obviously, it's you and Nick Hallam, DJ producer. You guys have obviously he's been with you since the very beginning. Who else is in the band these days when you're touring?
Yeah, Kath Coffey, who's been with us since Elevate My Mind came
Yeah.
out, really, because
Uh-huh.
she sang on it. And Tanzai Omar is our drummer now,
Mm-hmm.
our original drummer. Owen If sadly passed away 2 years ago. So,
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, Tanzai Omar is our drummer now. So that's basically the lineup for the show. Um, yeah, we're a fairly small setup. Um, and it's really down to the energy on the stage. That's what the show's all about.
Uh-huh.
You
Yeah.
know, just
You've always had a lot
getting
of
a
energy live.
yeah, it's just about getting a good energy and a good vibration going with the people. It's like
Hmm.
it's important.
Right.
Uh, and to be honest, just to be honest with people, and and talk about how you feel. Uh, we're not really into these sort of rehearsed stage dance routine kind of, you know, uh, big commercial kind of things. It's like we prefer just to have sort of have a conversation with the audience and play the music and and just see if we can find like common ground in that area. You
Right.
know, that's more our where we feel comfortable doing that.
Right. And keeping it on the positive vibes. I mean, going back to the original, your first music, always super positive vibes. And that was a lot of what was going on in hip hop and things at the time. But it's good that you've kind of continued that really optimistic kind of positivity that the band has always had.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, positivity is important, but also just to reflect what you see,
Mhm.
uh, um, which I think is necessary, not just to try to sweep it under the carpet.
Mhm.
It's important to me as a writer to reflect what I'm looking at and what I'm feeling, and sometimes it's not always positive.
Right.
You may be uh, feeling unhappy about what you're seeing, and you have to somehow artistically represent it. Um, which isn't to say that everything you do is depressing, but
Right.
it sort of gives you an energy still, and I think if you actually looked at the lyrics of some of the things we'd written, even on Connected, uh, you might see some of that,
Mhm.
uh, you know. But like I say, it's the energy of the music which I think maybe people are attracted to, uh, but the message somehow is what gets you to create, you know. It's when those things just appear in when you're writing that you kind of go, oh, I never thought of saying that, and it just sort of appears out of the air.
Right.
That I think it's a beautiful thing.
Definitely. Excellent. Well, I wanted to talk about some of the newer music. I mean, I see obviously you guys have been producing, you know, all throughout the years. But what really got my attention, I believe it was last year when the single "Soul Love" came out. That looks like it was a collaboration with Fred Everything, and then the remix
Yeah.
from Clive from Accounts. My show is called the Sunset Soirée. Play a lot of soulful house music, and so when I saw those singles coming out, it really got my attention. And looking back at the catalog, especially over the past 5 to 10 years, you have a lot of those house producers doing remixes for you, like Jimster and Tom Middleton. That was really cool to see. Tell me a little bit about the music in the past 10 years, because it does seem to lean a lot more toward the dance, always to the dance floor, but more on a house and Afro house, deep house kind of vibration. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Because in about 2015, we decided to start our own label.
Hmm.
And we started it with a guy called Fetish from the German group Terra Nova in
Hmm.
Berlin. Um, and we got distribution from Compact in Munich. No, is it Cologne? I think it's Cologne. Um, and we started off just thinking, yeah, let's make it a label for our releases, but also for gradually we'll start getting demos of electronic music, from young guys and young people making music, and we'll be able to, release young artists as well. And gradually the label picked up steam, and we started putting out music which was categorized as Afro. Didn't realize it that it was going to be categorized as that, but the music we were releasing got put in that category, and we've sort of gone down that road quite deeply. Uh, and I think because we just kind of feel where that music's coming from more, because it has a strong identity and it's very organic, and it has a different identity rhythmically,
Right.
and There's a lot of people out there who are writing songs over the music, uh, and a lot of people, playing live instruments too. And there's a lot of fresh talent in that scene and the Amapiano scene. Uh, and so we sort of naturally just went down that avenue. And over the years, we started collaborating with a lot more electronic artists like Adam Port from Kinda Music, Anja Schneider,
Right.
um, Ryu, and Rodriguez Jr. There's a whole bunch of people we did tunes with. Um, uh, and that sort of leads us up to this point now. And like last year, we did the collaboration with Fred Everything. And it's really enjoyable doing collaborations. It's quite nice just to be approached with a fresh groove that you haven't really had anything to do with, and just somebody say, "Yeah, we just want to see if you can get a vibe on it," and it makes you think in a different way about how to write a vocal. And a lot of these artists are very interesting.
Yeah,
Um, so it's quite invigorating.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
it
I mean,
also it sort of helps to energize the music you're making as well. Not necessarily that we're going to make a totally deep house or Afro house record, but it just helps you to rethink sonically how you want to sound, and then sort of take yourself apart and put yourself back together again.
yeah, and being inspired by a lot of those fresh sounds and fresh new
Exactly,
talent.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I mean, you're up to seemed like over 200 releases, and a good majority, as you're saying, are sort of in that vein. And some of the artists on there, some of my favorite artists from the past few years, like C. Al Assad, one of my favorite
yeah,
producers.
yeah.
Manu, a few remixes that Manu has done. So
No, he's
great.
excellent. Yeah,
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
good.
So great to see that. Well, if we could go back to some early history, if you don't mind, as I mentioned,
That's cool.
I come from the Elevate My Mind days back in the day, Supernatural, Lost in Music, and you guys came to town back in those days. And I've asked a few friends, no one can lock down the date, but I think it's probably 1991, right when Elevate My Mind was hitting. And you guys played a small bar here in Dallas that me and a bunch of friends went to. And I remember you talked about the energy on stage. I remember it back then even. And not only that, but the live presentation, super sparse, but kind of groundbreaking, I thought at the time. Live drummer, DJ, and then of course you out in front. Real raw hip hop and almost what the Roots, everyone said that they did first, but you guys were doing that way before them, kind of an organic band, live musician type thing. Can you talk about those days back then? I don't know if you remember coming to town in that tour, but it was very exciting for
Well,
us.
that Dallas bar gig, was that set up very quickly, or
Probably.
was it something that was booked for a while?
I remember finding out about it kind of at the last minute. I feel like Jesus Jones was touring at the same time. I'm not sure if you were touring with them, but it was sort of a pop up, if you will, because
Right.
not a ton of people, but sort of
I've
the
got a feeling that might have been the show that before our gig, it was a different club. It
okay.
was it was an S&M club, right?
Oh, I
Yeah.
hadn't heard that.
And and uh, and they had to get the fire brigade in because someone who got chained to a radiator, handcuffed to a radiator,
Oh
and
wow,
and they couldn't undo themselves from the radiator.
hilarious. Oh man, I'm gonna have to dig
Yeah,
around
it
and
was
find out about that.
it was really eye-opening, really. I remember Owen, our drummer, rest in peace, though. Him saying, "We're lucky to be here," because we were seeing things that we just never normally see, right? But
Wow,
that's
that
life on the road, you know. So yeah, they were great
absolutely
gigs. We loved because at the time we were doing, tours with Happy Mondays in America as well,
right. I was
and
gonna
they were
mention.
really really excellent tours, really good vibes. Yeah,
Wow, that's great. That must have been great exposure as well. I mean, those were the heady days of, Manchester, if you will, and they were sort of on
yeah.
top back in those days too. So that must have been a really exciting time.
It was excellent. Yeah, we went so many amazing places and saw incredible things. It's like different weather systems. In between 2 days. It'd
Oh
be
yeah.
snow in New York and hurricanes in Florida. So it was yeah, it was amazing. Yeah,
Absolutely. So talk about those early days with the record label. You guys started the G Street label along with
yeah,
Richie Rich. Some people might know
yeah.
him from some early house tunes. And there was also a Jungle Brothers connection back then. Talk about
That's
that
right.
label and getting started back in those days.
Yeah, well, we started that label with Richie Rich, who was a scratch DJ, and people might remember him for the tune he did called Salsa House, which
Absolutely.
was quite a big tune, I think.
Hmm.
And yeah, John Baker also, and really it was the old school thing that we just pressed up our own vinyls, and then Richie would take them out in the van and take them round the shops and distribute them that way. And because John had contacts in New York, uh, he was going to New York a lot, and he licensed the Jungle Brothers, and he had some early demos from PM Dawn,
Oh yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
when they was a very kind of smoky hip hop
Uh-huh.
outfit.
Yeah, they were Fourth
Uh,
and B-Way also, weren't they?
yeah, and so they started out on G Street too, and Queen Latifah.
Hmm.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that was going on there. It was really exciting, um, and it was like a sort of melting pot, really, of energy, and it was really down to something quite incidental that we ended up being on Ireland, which was that Julian Palmer, our A&R man, was down at the WAG Club and he heard our first 12,
The WAG Club, you
which
said.
yeah,
Wow.
uh,
Legendary.
in in the West End of London, and
Hmm.
he asked the DJ what this tune was, which was "Move It," which was our first 12. And he asked to license it to Fall from Broadway. And
Wow.
from there, he licensed a second single, which is What Is Soul. And then they wanted to do an album with us. And then we gradually moved over to Fall from Broadway. And that's really how we kicked off, because above the record label was a modeling agency, which was run by John Baker's wife, Ziggy Golding.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it was just a hub of creativity,
Hmm.
really. Um, and we built a studio in the basement, and we'd have all kinds of people coming down there to record, from acid house guys from Chicago and Detroit. um, and I remember because Nick used to engineer for them, and I'd give them a lift to the station, and these guys were big people, right? Like, I mean they were big. Like, I had tall and wide and just big people. And
Chicago
I had this
guys.
little car. You may know that, have heard of a car called a Mini, an
Uh-huh.
English car, right?
Right.
And they're really tiny cars, right? And when these guys got into my car, it would just tipple over right onto one side, because they were just like huge giants of
Uh-huh.
people.
Do you remember some of the
Um,
artists, some of those Chicago artists that would come there to play at your studio?
yeah, I think there was an English artist called DS Building Contractors, who later became the Orb.
Oh, right. Of course.
Right, that was what they were first called.
Hmm.
We did, I think Nick engineered their tunes, and I think Adonis come down. I think it was Adonis,
Wow.
uh,
No
and of
way
course
back.
Outlaw Posse and stuff like that.
That's great.
It was yeah,
Heady
yeah. There was a
times.
bunch of people.
Well,
Yeah,
you mentioned the WAG Club in your early 12. So that was my next question is where were you guys coming from? What scene were you coming from? Because if you listen to those first couple albums, I feel a lot of rare groove, acid jazz, jazz funk, in addition to hip hop, of course. So tell me about the scene that you guys came out of when you guys started producing your own music.
Well, we started doing that in me and Nick started experimenting in 1985, 86, before we even thought of starting a group. We'd sit around at home with a reel-to-reel tape recorder and make tape loops.
Nice.
So one of us would have a drumstick at one end of the room with the tape going round it, and then Owen, our drummer, um, he gave us his old radiogram, which had a belt-driven turntable and a cassette player on it, and a radio, and we used that to make our first drum loop, which meant sitting up all night with your fingers on play and record and rewinding.
Right. Uh-huh.
It was a cover version of Stevie Wonder's Superstition, which has a
Oh,
drum break at the beginning.
of course. That's great.
So that took you a whole night to make a rhythm track because you
Mm-hmm.
were doing it all manually.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, what was the question?
What was the scene that you guys were a part of? I mean, you were you
Yeah,
at the
well,
WAG Club a lot and places like that, Giles Peterson and
in
those
them
kind of
days,
guys.
it was like a melting pot
Mm-hmm.
in London. You know, the music scene was like in the early days, it was part futurist, new romantic, post punk, hip hop, acid house, reggae, dub. You know, it was all different musics would be being played in the same DJ booth.
Right.
And you'd see all different kinds of fashion on the night bus home. It was wild. It was such a feeling of freedom before it started to get tightened up, you know. But in them days, it was just so free, and nobody really knew what to call anything. You know, that there wasn't really categories. Things weren't categorized so much then. So there was one dance music chart for all of dance music.
Right.
You know, whereas now, as you know, there's like probably 10 charts for drum and bass alone.
Right.
Uh, so everything would cross fertilize, which was why you started getting these mutations in rave music. And it was the same with the club scene. Uh, you know, everybody would just go down, you know, the Clink Street jams or the hip hop jams, or, you know, you just see the same faces at all of these places, and you go to dub clubs, and you know, it was amazing, really, and it was just such a free environment. You know, there weren't cameras everywhere. You know,
There weren't phones everywhere.
you know, you could smoke in the corner, and
Right.
you know, it was a breeze. It was amazing. We
Yeah.
used to go off on the night bus with a microphone, a cassette recorder, and just try and bust in on clubs and play a tune,
That's
you
great.
know, and then come home on the night bus, you know, with a, you know, microphone in the bag.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was great.
DIY. That's
Yeah, it was.
great.
It was like that,
That's
and
great.
that's how the scene grew.
Hmm.
You know, so gradually we became a sort of affiliated with the hip hop scene, but not really accepted by it. And I think we knew early on that we weren't really a purist hip hop group. We were a sort of mutation, although
Absolutely.
we got a lot of inspiration from the early rap music and the production and the way that the energy was being put across and the message that was being put across was highly influential in what we did. Um, but pure rap audiences wouldn't really accept us, so we started to look outside of that and try touring with different sorts of groups, just to try to get our vibe across to different people. You know, so we toured with Living Colour, De La Soul, uh, Original Concept,
Wow.
uh, U2, Happy Mondays. You know, we toured with lots of different people, um, just so that we could, for one thing, get experience, and for another thing, just expose ourselves to people so that they could, you know, because it was in those days it was quite different for people to see um, a group on stage that didn't have guitars and a bass and the regular setup. We were turntables and a drummer
Right.
and a vocalist. So a lot of people were a bit hesitant to accept it. But thankfully, a lot of people got a real buzz off it.
That's great.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I mean, I do kind of pine for those days, in clubs where the genres were all mixed up. That was my history. And again, giving me an opportunity to play stereo MCs next to, Little Lewis, and then next to Moni Love, next to Happy Mondays. And it was like that back in those days, different BPMs all night. and
Yeah,
the opening minds, and everyone was accepting of that kind of thing.
yeah,
So
that's right.
that was
Yeah.
great days. So we talked
Mm.
about, the small club you were playing in Dallas back in probably 91, but just a couple of years later, you dropped Connected. Connected is a global hit, and you're playing in not small clubs anymore. So that was a huge hit. Obviously, I know you've probably talked about that forever, but talk about how having a hit like that changed the band, changed the trajectory, and maybe changed how the outlook of you guys as a band.
Well, I guess it was a steep learning curve. But then, the whole history of what we did, when you think about it, is it was three albums in a relatively short period of time. So uh, each record we made took us somewhere different. Um, and with, you know, you just got the feeling something was happening, and you just had to ride it. That's all you had to do, just ride it. And it was a beautiful feeling. Music just seemed to happen. Uh, it was like you were just being given gifts. You go into studios and you didn't really know what you were going to do, but somehow something turned up. And it's a bit difficult to claim authorship on stuff like that. So it seems to make itself. Uh, and so with Connected, we did achieve, uh, you know, a, I'd say more commercial success, which meant that things did change for us, uh, and we became identifiable. When you walk down the street, and people were hearing your records, and they wanted to say what's up and say nice music and that and stuff. So I guess it did change things, and to a degree, we did kind of maybe subconsciously feel that we'd reached a certain goal, and maybe did get more difficult from there. Um, but the way I look at it is, it's like music comes in waves, and like a wave of energy, and there was a sort of wave of energy there, with a whole bunch of groups just surged forward, and it was like we were all just surfing on this wave, and we were like individual artists just kind of trying to make it over this huge wave and see where it landed us, really. Um, uh, and it was, I guess, when you do achieve that sort of success, then the record company and the management, they're all saying, oh yeah, you got to do this tour, you got to do that tour, and you got to do this and that and blah blah blah. And you end up being a bit disorientated, to be honest with you. And we were on the road for so long away from home that when I got home and I listened to the radio, I didn't hardly recognize the music. I was like, "What's this? You almost lost touch with what was going on, because it wasn't like now where you've got the internet and you've got your computer with you all the time and you can see what's going on. You didn't have a phone or anything like that. So if you're on the road for 18 months and you were just like doing show after show after show, it was a bit difficult to hear what was going on back home. So you did feel a bit oddly disconnected, uh, all that
Ironically
time.
enough.
Yeah,
So
there was a certain irony to it. Yeah.
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 But you
So
rode that wave. You rode that wave with a lot of the more dance oriented sounds and the Happy Mondays type thing that we were talking about. But then you said you got back home, and that would have been mid late '90s, and then all of a sudden Britpop is happening, and guitars all of a sudden were king again, especially over in the UK, I'm sure. And I'm sure that was a little disconcerting, and kind of figuring out what your next move was going to be at that point, right?
I don't know if anybody wants to hear about this. I mean, it must have been this old ground, that's been trodden so many times. But in truth, from my own heart, I just felt like I'd squeezed everything out of myself
I
on
see.
that third album creatively, and it's almost like, in truth, I just felt like I'd put my whole life experience and squeezed it into that record, for my part in making it. I felt like I just used everything that I had. And when I come home, I was just like, what do I do? What do I do now? I can't think of anything. So we went straight back in the studio and started like, recording again and making beats and stuff like that. But, for a long time, nothing was materializing into a song. We could make beats and make grooves and do remixes, and we started another label, Natural Response, and started a publishing company, and there was these other things going on the periphery of it, but it was like creatively, I don't know, man. I just felt like because I sort of usually come up with lyrics and stuff and a fair amount of the music. I just felt like I'd creatively hit a bit of a brick wall, and I wasn't sure where I was going. It was quite a weird time. Um, and then in I think 2000 we released a DJ Kicks record,
Right.
uh, which was really good for us. It was great for us to do that and actually make a record again. Uh, and it sort of freed us from the chains of our own mental incarceration, if you like.
And with that DJ
And
Kicks, you're probably able to put kind of go back to your influences. And I know those kind of compilations, you can play all of these various type of genres in that mix. So that was probably also rejuvenating, kind of go back to yourself again, what your real roots
it
are.
was just, I think in a odd sort of way, the way that being successful affected me is my confidence took a bit of a nosedive, which is ironic in itself. I mean, I'm probably saying too much, but because this is quite personal, but I don't know why. It must be some kind of, mental uh, mentality thing, that I became less confident and uh, I didn't quite know where to go next. But just having made a record with the DJ Kicks thing kind of rejuvenated something in us and gave us that confidence to move forward. And that's when we made Deep Down and Dirty. Um,
It's a
and
great album.
Thanks. And that track in itself uh, was really, we were actually working with another producer on another track, and I made the backing track whilst Nick and the other producer were sort of messing around with this other tune. I made the backing track on a pair of headphones whilst they were doing it. So it just came together very quickly.
Hmm.
And I quite often used to work with two pairs of headphones, one pair connected to turntables and one pair connected to a sampler. So I'd get a groove going, and then I'd just be messing around with things off records as I listened to my groove going in the sampler. And so I just put this groove together for Deep Down and Dirty whilst they were doing that. And they listened to it and they got more excited about this groove than they were about the groove they were working on.
Right.
And I had the sort of chorus idea for it. And in the end, we didn't really know what to do because I didn't have a lyric for it. And so we just said, let's jam. And and a bit like what we did with Connected, I just grabbed a mic and just said whatever was on my mind at that time. And it was just like spoken word kind of thing, and we just edited the jam, and that's how the tune came about. And the rest of the tune seemed to follow, without too much pain, really. It was about going through the pain to actually find a way to enjoy making music again.
That's
I know
great.
it sounds ironic and like, what's wrong with these guys, And truly, if I knew the answer, then I wouldn't have gone through all of that if there was an easier way to go through it. But as far as I can see, there wasn't. So sometimes you just have to take the hard road.
Yeah, it seems like a natural thing about, the highs of success and the craziness and just to come down and kind of readjust again. Seems
Yeah,
somewhat
because
natural.
it's like any walk of life.
Hmm.
It has a high point and it has its low points, and depending on why you do it, the high points and low points can be different.
Yeah.
So if why you're doing it is because you love being creative, then the low point is going to be when you're not being creative.
Hmm.
Uh, and those were the low points for me, is like not being creative. Oh, it's very depressing, you know. Because that's what I find with music. You know, if I'm making music and I'm being creative, whatever anybody thinks about the end product, I feel good in myself. You know, my
Good. It's
body
good for
works
your
better.
soul. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's good for my soul. My mind feels good. I feel encouraged in myself. I feel like smiling at everybody in the street. You know, I'm a happy human being, right?
That's
And
great.
yeah, and that's like I kind of think, yeah, that's why I decided to do all of this, right? When I was 12 and started learning the guitar and all of that. It's like that's why I do it, man.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And that inspiration seems to have continued since the DJ Kick series, with the singles, a new single, you know, almost one or two every year, and then of course all the new artists that you're working with, where you're getting vibing off of that creativity. Also, I'm sure that's really also good for your soul.
Yeah, you have to, I guess you have to be adaptable. You know,
Hmm.
adaptation is part of the path and and so we've been doing a lot more collaborations recently. But hopefully in some form some new music will come soon. So uh yeah,
So
that's what we're
maybe
looking
a
at.
new album around the corner. A
It's
collect.
possible, yeah.
Yeah,
You know, we're working on a bunch of stuff right now, so
that's
we'll see
great.
what goes there. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a weird question. I don't know what you think about this, but where do you see stereo MCs as fitting into sort of the lineage of British hip hop? I know you don't necessarily associate yourself with hip hop per se, but there wasn't a whole lot of Brits doing hip hop back in your day. It was more on the underground and more on the club scene. Of course, now huge names like Stormzy, Dizzy Rascal, and Little
Yeah.
Sims. Where do you guys see yourself fitting into that lineage?
I'm not very good at answering that sort of question because I, I don't really look at what we've done and go and see where we fit in. We never really fitted in back in the day.
Good point. Yeah.
Um, and I don't think those sort of artists are probably even aware of us. Um, uh, and a lot of people, I think, who maybe do know about us, probably only know about us for our most successful releases, uh, which would slightly not misrepresent us, but not really show the full picture of where we come from. Because we did start out as a very underground form
Right.
of music, exploratory and experimental. Like our first album was really a very experimental record, all to do with sampling
Right.
and looking for very original ways to put together totally different sources of music. So the way we put together things from very different areas, that was the magic of sampling to us, was how one piece of music could make another piece of music or sound mean a completely different thing and make something brand new, rather than just sampling an obvious tune and sort of ripping off a record. It was more how to make one thing turn into another. Um, so um, I think that is really what the seed that we like to go back to, is to go back to that. Yeah, well, let's just go back to that experimental vibe of like sonically just do something that makes you light up, you
Right.
know, because you can, you know, we've been doing this for so many years now and we've been through the whole album tour schedule quite a few times, enough times to be kind of tired of it and not excited by that schedule. So at this point in my life as a human being, I'd rather look at it like I want to do something that's really going to excite me and make me feel inspired. So let's experiment and maybe drip feed new ideas into the live set
Mhm.
and just keep sort of on and off the road. Keep it as a constant vehicle that we can keep out doing gigs. Just keep coming home for periods of time so we can keep being creative, and not do this hammer and tong out, sort of suck the blood out of him, uh, commerciality thing. Make it a hit. I'm not that bothered about it. I'd just rather do something that I thought was artistically satisfying, because I'm an oldish guy now. It's like I've been through all of that, and I'd quite like to just sit here and, you know, make a CD that had all the album notes in it and tell you where we recorded it and have some nice artwork and have something solid that, maybe only sold 500 copies, but you had a solid
Tangible,
thing. Yeah,
right?
or just press up, a certain amount of vinyl and just go, yeah, but it's a special thing, and you get this little booklet with the lyrics on, like poems, and
Absolutely.
like there's something I can look at and just go, I really feel good about that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's sort of, you know, that's how if it was a world that I was creating, that's how I'd like to look at it, that it was something you could do like that.
It's all about the creativity and the inspiration. That's great.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and give something special to people who are really maybe interested in it.
Yep. Well, you've been giving people something special for many, many years, including myself and, all of my friends. You guys really meant a lot to us, starting off back then, and you continue to inspire guys like me. So we definitely appreciate you.
Well, thanks for this. You
Excellent.
see, my attitude towards gigs is don't think about it.
Okay.
Right. So I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how many gigs I've got to do. I just think just get to the first one, make sure you're ready for it, and just nail it, and then move on to the next one. Uh, because I still get very nervous before I get on stage, and I just, uh, it takes a lot of energy out of me. So I just have to approach each one as I go, and I just figured that's my job.
Yeah.
Everyone else can think about the schedule and all of that. My
Hmm.
job is to get on the mic and do that.
Oh,
So
one last thing I want to ask you with regard to touring. So I saw that you guys are participating in the Cruel World Festival later
yeah,
on this year with a whole lot of other acts, legacy acts, I'll call them. You guys aren't a legacy act because you've continued to be creative. So what are your thoughts about doing those type of shows and those type of tours?
that is actually pretty. That's a nice show. I mean, there's some nice artists on that show. It's like,
Absolutely.
I feel pretty honoured to be included on that bill.
Hmm.
Um, I
Yeah.
think some of those retro things can be a little cheesy.
Hmm.
Uh, a bit like they're in to make a few bucks out of nostalgia.
Right.
Um, in all honesty, sometimes you have to do them because you've got to, you have to do some gigs that pay in order to do some gigs that maybe don't pay. And that's life. That's sometimes it's life. But if by any chance we happen to have to do a cheap bit of a cheesy gig, we don't think twice about it. It's like whatever it is, we're still going to go out there and be raw, right? Just be raw. Do what we do and be raw about it. So even if it is a bit of a premeditated attempt to cash in on a bit of nostalgia, we try to let people know that ain't our bag, and we're actually putting something fresh out in the atmosphere. So, you know, it's it's part of the way things run. Sometimes you just have to balance the books. That's life.
Well, thanks
Yeah,
again
I'm
for
chuffed
joining
with it.
us today, Rob B, Stereo MCs here on
Yeah, you're
KNON and
welcome, man.
KNON Now. This has been great. It means a lot to me, and I'm so glad you've continued to be creative throughout all these years. We're going to keep playing those tracks. Like I said, I'm really excited about the Clive from Accounts one. You know, there's a Jimster remix not too long ago. Jimster's great. It means a lot to still be playing your music alongside my old scratchy Elevate My Mind 12-inch. So it's great. So
Well,
thanks again, Rob B.
yeah, thank you. Right. Nice
All right.
one. Yeah, peace and love, man.